My life and my world were destroyed, and it all began when mysterious towers started popping up all around the world. No one knew where they came from or why they appeared out of nowhere. But they were later dubbed Nightmare Towers because of their creepy nature. That was the time the Nightmare Tower began choosing people randomly, giving them a chance to become tower walkers and save the world. Those who responded to the tower's call were instantly summoned inside. As a kickstart, they were handed battle gear by the interface system, which let them use unnatural strength and skills. The kind you usually see in RPG games. But the worst part is that it wasn't a game. For the people living outside, things quickly became nightmarish. The towers soon unleashed waves of monsters into the real world, and this phenomenon was later called a tower impact. Humanity fought back as best they could, but the first tower impact wiped out nearly 30% of the world's population. The tower walkers trapped inside the tower could do nothing but watch the catastrophe unfold and see their loved ones die. Since they weren't really killing any monsters within the tower, it became overrun with them, and eventually those monsters broke into the real world. But to make a change, they all decided to ascend and kill monsters with the help of the powers and skills they'd been given. In order to tempt them and steer them off course, the tower cunningly offered an opportunity like no other. They were given an object known as the Regression Stone. As the name suggests, it allowed tower walkers to go back in time to the moment before the tower impact happened. Their memories and experiences would remain intact after regression. Some didn't hesitate for a second and cashed in on this chance, while others felt suspicious of the stone. Turns out the folks who used it didn't actually travel back in time. Instead, they were transferred to a parallel universe with a different timeline. So, basically, those who returned to the past weren't fixing anything for this current world. They simply abandoned it. As they kept ascending the tower, things only got worse, especially after the second tower impact. So instead of dying a pathetic death at the hands of monsters, many decided to abandon their world and regress. The fate of this world was left only to the brave souls who resisted the temptation of the regression stone. But little did they know, what awaited them was death on the 98th floor, the chamber of hellfire. Jaehwan was utterly defeated along with his comrades. Yet they didn't give up, fighting until their last breath. Eventually, our boy managed to slay the tower guardian at the cost of his friends' lives. His one and only friend, the one he cherished most, also chose to abandon this reality with his final breath. It broke Jaehwan's heart to see his friend make such a pitiful choice. But the protagonist didn't waver. He pushed forward and eventually reached the 99th floor where he had to face the guardian, the frostworm Velisis. It's been 10 long years since he reached the 99th floor, fighting that monstrosity. Though the 98th floor nearly destroyed him, he knows that without the equipment abandoned by the other tower walkers who were once his friends, he'd have been dead long ago. Right now, he's back in the lower levels of the tower, meeting a blacksmith named Jay. The blacksmith is shocked that our protagonist actually wants to challenge that monster again. But Jaehwan doesn't hesitate before confirming it. He's not backing down until he finishes what he started. Here's a little context about this place. Some time ago, the tower walkers reclaimed a village on the 50th floor after finally defeating the dragon that ruled it. That village is now called Apos. Of all the blacksmiths who once lived in Apos, Jay is now the only one left. Jay is even sad because the demand for ore that had always came from the lower level floors has almost extinguished. Jaehwan thinks to himself that this kind of outcome had been bound to happen sooner or later. After all, there are barely any survivors left. Jay pauses for a moment, and then asks if he's noticed anything strange during his recent travels through the tower walkers reclaimed a village on the 50th floor after finally defeating the dragon that ruled it. That village is now called Apos. Of all the blacksmiths who once lived in Apos, Jay is now the only one left. Jay is even sad because the demand for ore that had always came from the lower level floors has almost extinguished. Jaehwan thinks to himself that this kind of outcome had been bound to happen sooner or later. After all, there are barely any survivors left. Jay pauses for a moment, and then asks if he's noticed anything strange during his recent travels through the tower. And Jaehwan recalls the place where the Stone of Regression had been found. Strange markings carved into its surface in letters he couldn't read. Though when Jae asks, he only says he didn't see anything. His mind drifts briefly to Hyran, the old woman who disappeared only yesterday, leaving Jae and her as the last remaining supporters in Oedipus until now. Jaehwan then asks directly to be taught smithing. The sudden request causes the smith to freeze mid-swing. Once again, our boy is back on the 98th floor, taking another shot at defeating this arrogant dragon. The monster commends the brave tower walker, acknowledging him as the pioneer who managed to reach the 99th floor all on his own. The dragon may have a tough exterior, but our boy has already begun chipping away at its hardened scales. No matter how many times it takes, he's prepared to return endlessly until the monster finally falls. During one of his runs, an attempt ends with him being completely crushed, leaving him battered and bruised. At this point, even the mighty dragon can't help but acknowledge the resolve burning within this young man. Jaehwan carries an unyielding desire, a singular obsession, an obsession to defeat this monster and make his friend's sacrifice truly meaningful. However, the dragon believes defeat is inevitable and failure is the only fate awaiting one. But our boy lunges forth after breaking free from the ice, fully prepared to prove the monster wrong. He takes his stance once more, relying on the only technique he knows, which is piercing. The dragon even finds it funny that the kid keeps charging in with the same old trick. You see, Jaehwan wasn't as fortunate as other tower walkers who started their careers much earlier, giving them opportunities to obtain unique skills and hidden classes. Jaehwan had nothing to his name, so he poured everything he had into one simple yet devastating technique, the art of piercing. He pierced his targets relentlessly, repeating the motion tens of millions of times. This refined mastery even earned him several nicknames. His piercing only grew faster, stronger, and more precise, eventually evolving into something comparable to a hidden class skill. And because it isn't an actual skill, Jaehwan can use it endlessly without consuming spiritual energy, unlike hidden abilities. Even so, not even hundreds of thousands of jabs were enough to deal truly significant damage. Then, Jaehwan notices something. The monster's weakness lies in its jaw. The moment the dragon opens its maw to unleash a massive icy roar, Jaehwan seizes the opportunity. He pierces upward from within, obliterating one of its eyes and shattering half its jaw. Even after pouring everything he had into that strike, it still wasn't enough to completely destroy the monster's M. Deciding to get serious, the dragon takes to the skies and unleashes a relentless barrage of ice. Jaehwan narrowly avoids the attacks at first, but eventually becomes overwhelmed. Seeing this, the dragon boasts about its strength, convinced that a mere tower walker could never bring down a beast of its caliber. Maybe things might have been different if more fighters like Jaehwan had worked together. That's precisely why the dragon feels satisfied knowing the foolish humans fell for the allure of the nightmare stones. Hearing this, Jaehwan is startled and demands the dragon explain more about these nightmare stones. Instead of answering, the monster begins crushing everything beneath its massive paws, leaving Jaehwan no choice but to retreat for now. Jaehwan is left with barely any HP, and a single swipe would have been enough to finish him off. Still, he is curious more than ever. He needs to learn more about the nightmare stones and what that dragon truly knows. To get the answers he seeks, he spends half a decade fighting the monster. At last, his efforts bore fruit. The nightmare of the 99th floor is defeated, and the victor sits right over the monster's devastated body. Now, before the monster's life extinguishes, Jaehwan demands to know the truth about the nightmare stones. The dragon, however, doesn't give him the satisfaction. He says Jaehwan can only learn the mystery behind them by reaching the last floor. With those final words, the monster dies, and our boy earns the Ice Dragon sword as a reward. Though honestly, this so-called sword doesn't really look like one. Now comes the moment of truth. The door to the final floor materializes right before him. Jaehwan steps forward without any fear in his heart, even though he knows nothing that lies beyond. Entering the final floor, Jaehwan realizes he's standing in a strange place where countless panels of light float around him, each displaying a different image. From there, he sees the tower's condition in the
While most
outside
people's
world
worlds
and a
are,
topos as well.
beautiful or serene, Jaehwan unleashes his world, which is simply named Oblivion. It is a literal hellscape. We're talking an inferno born of his pure, unadulterated hatred and rage against this systemic world that tortures humanity. And this sheer intensity, it actually neutralizes the king's void particles.
Inside Oblivion, Jaehwan's sheer ruthlessness really shines through. He completely ignores the king's taunts. When the Void Sword grazes his arm, he doesn't panic. He instantly just slashes his own corrupted flesh right off to stop the spread. Then, using a unique sensory technique called Suspicion, he actually traces the magical thread connecting this clone body all the way back to the king's real body in the Abyss. And with one impossibly precise stab, Jaehwan severs the connection and completely dismantles the catastrophe.
Which brings us to Section 5. The Reluctant New Lord.
So, this massive victory unexpectedly forces Jaehwan into a role he literally never wanted, subverting yet another classic fantasy trope. The dying lord actually transfers his authority over to Jaehwan, and left with a recorded message from the previous 16 masters, Jaehwan hears them say, "Don't get greedy, don't make unnecessary changes. People just need stability to survive a little longer." He realizes their entire philosophy was just to maintain this incredibly depressing status quo. But Jaehwan absolutely refuses to play along with that complacency. He totally despises the system.
Jaehwan's radical approach flips the traditional lord duties completely on their head. I mean, while a normal lord would be managing paperwork and maintaining peace, Jaehwan's very first decree is to literally abolish the title of Fortress Master. Instead, he declares an open combat tournament. Anyone in Chaos who can defeat him in a duel gets the throne. But if they lose, they are drafted into his mandatory high-risk military expedition straight into the Abyss.
Man, what's really interesting here is that while Jaehwan is shaking things up in Gorgon, a massive orchestrated conspiracy is secretly toppling the rest of Chaos. The Forbidden Heaven clan didn't just attack Gorgon, they completely wiped out the Lightning God clan, the neighboring Manticore fortress fell to traitors, and communication systems across all of Chaos were hijacked to keep everyone completely in the dark.
But despite these mounting, existential threats from rival clans and corrupt gods pulling the strings, Jaehwan genuinely couldn't care less about ruling a fortress. He remains laser-focused on his ultimate goal. He's launching that suicidal Abyss expedition to climb to the very top of the Tree of Illusion and destroy the entire systemic world, from the top down.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a pretty burning question that sets the stage for the next massive arc. Will Jaehwan's sheer, unyielding willpower be enough to finally break the Tree of Illusion, or will the crushing weight of chaos consume him